Last week's Islamic extremist terrorist attack in London was executed by a single attacker armed with a vehicle and a knife. ISIS claimed credit. The attacker was only brought down by British police using their weapons. It's a vivid reminder of how the growing terrorist threat in Europe has changed policing, something correspondent Scott Thuman found when he was last there for Full Measure.
Walk the beat with a British police officer and something may seem amiss to the average American. There is no gun. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a so-called Bobby who does carry a firearm. A reality the world witnessed just last week when a man ran down pedestrians with a car and tried to enter Parliament armed with a knife. The first officer he confronted, the one he stabbed, was unarmed. This is a nation that has prided itself on its extreme lack of firearms. But even before the latest attack, change was in the air. The government decided terrorism meant gearing up by adding 600 high-profile, highly armed special officers to ensure the public there adequately protected, and another 1,500 officers to be firearms trained. You talk about that number of perhaps another 1,500. Is that enough?
Out of a force of about 130,000 people in total, you're looking at 5,500 of them being armed, which is an incredibly small proportion, particularly when you compare it to other countries, the United States, where everybody is armed. Is it enough? Well, we'll have to wait and see.
Steve White is the chair of the Police Federation and says Great Britain must be prepared for the new attacks that will come, and like the one on the Bataclan Theater in Paris. They can't always wait for quick response teams, where by motorbike or boat they are trained for speed, but limited in number. Do you want to see more officers with guns on the streets?
I think in terms of whether or not we have more firearms officers on the streets, it's going to be about the appropriateness in terms of threat. Are we ever going to get to a situation where every single police officer has to carry a gun? I sincerely hope not, and I certainly don't think that that is probably foreseeable in my service.
White says it will be a lengthy process that will take at least 2 years to train more than 1,000 officers to use lethal measures in a country where the concept has been so foreign for so long.
You know, in terms of increasing our firearms capability, yes, of course, we support that. But we would have to say, well, we did tell you so. We told you 3, 4, 5 years ago that this was going to happen.
And he says, listening to lessons learned during a previous war on terror. The IRA, Irish Republican Army, for years terrorized the British way of life by bombing in an effort to gain independence. John O'Connor was with Scotland Yard for decades.
The horror of that I still remember today, because the fear was that you could be walking in central London, just walking past a parked car, and whereas the fear today is of someone walking along of jihadi appearance with a rucksack on their back, you'd look twice.
It sounds like a bit of a flashback.
Yeah, it is a bit, but it's because the way of dealing with it is probably the same. Except that the strategy used by jihadists isn't to use car bombs at the moment.
This latest attack seems to prove that point. It was low tech, using a car and a knife, but still high profile, which throws attention back on intelligence gathering, an area where authorities have typically done well, helped by a population eager to relay anything suspicious to police who still believe bonding with those on one's beat is integral.
And I think they've been doing that very successfully. We don't always hear about the successes that they have, but I think the absence of major terrorist successes in this country since 7/7, is testament to that.
7/7 is the July date in 2005 that jihadists set off coordinated attacks on London's public transit system, killing 52, wounding more than 700. Until last week's attack at Parliament, British authorities had successfully foiled more than a dozen plots over the last 3 years. Even so, they always admitted another attack was inevitable.
We've got to make sure that the officers who are asking to do these difficult jobs, who are asking to run towards danger when others are running away, have the protection and the means to deal with the incidents.
Increasing the number of armed or arms-trained officers is made more difficult by how many are retiring. Steve White says they really need to find around 3,000 officers willing to use guns, not 1,500, already a bit of a challenge since many don't want the responsibility that comes with having a firearm. Scott Thuman for Full Measure.
Also on display in London, a certain British stoicism. Less than 24 hours after an attack that reached its front door, Parliament reopened on schedule the next morning. As for Scott, he's back in Europe for us right now. We'll hear from him in the weeks ahead.